This week we are doing chapter 18, which is climate, factors that cause climate, and the different types of climate zones. Later this week you're going to be doing a climate booklet, so this flipped lesson and these notes in tomorrow's worksheets will be very helpful for those things. So we just talked about this as our do now. What is climate and how is climate different from weather? Since we answered this together a few minutes ago, I'll just put this here. Weather, and we talked about this at the very beginning of the quarter. Weather is the day-to-day conditions in the atmosphere, precipitation, and temperature. So is it raining? Is it snowing? Is it dry? And is it hot or cold? Weather is constantly changing. It is difficult to predict, and it may vary widely in a given region. So for example, sunny and hot today, or cold and snowy, or whatever the weather might be. We'll see that both for weather and climate, we're always talking about temperature and precipitation. So climate, as was mentioned in the do now, climate is the average weather of an area over decades or centuries. So it's characterized by precipitation and temperature, same as the other. We were talking about this too. Obvious examples, the climate in Arizona is hot and dry. So not very much precipitation and hot. And when we look at the climate zones, the precipitation, there's actually ranges. So it'll say a desert is literally less than 10 inches of precipitation per year. And the temperature ranges are similar. Yes? And what these guys were saying, yeah, so in a desert, when there is flooding, because there's not a lot of plants and not a lot of topsoil, it's either clay or sand, the water just runs off. So when they have like huge, heavy monsoonal rains, they get a lot of flooding, flash flooding, because the water doesn't soak into the ground. If you have a lot of rich soil and plants, that water is more likely to stay rather than run off. But yeah, it is very muddy water too. Okay, so climate and weather. Questions about either of those? And next week, when we talk a little bit more about climate change, keep in mind that climate is average weather over decades or centuries. So a lot of times when people talk about climate change, people get all fired up about it when there's 1 year when it's warmer, or when even in the midst of a drought, then you have a year that's very cold or something like that. But climate is patterns over a much longer period of time than from 1 year to the next. All right, so next we're going to talk about what factors affect climate. Why is the climate different in one place than another? So there are 4 major factors that affect temperature. So we said that climate is temperature and precipitation. So let's start with things that affect temperature. Now some of this is pretty obvious, right? Where are the warmest places on the Earth? Near the equator. So places with warmer climates are more likely to be near the equator, and places near the poles are going to be cooler. That's obvious, right? So latitude. One of the major factors that affects temperature is latitude. And again, we've talked about this quite a bit before when we talked about seasons and all this sort of stuff. The more direct sunlight, the more direct rays from the sun hitting the equator make it warmer there, and glance off at an angle on the poles. Totally logical? Yes? All right. But what about places at the same latitude that have a different climate? So Kansas versus Colorado. Yes. Yes. Yeah, and that's going to affect precipitation too. But for instance, in Colorado, some places in Colorado have a slightly warmer or cooler climate, weather. Yes. So altitude. So 2 of the major things that are going to affect temperature are latitude and altitude. And again, you know this. You go up higher in altitude, the average weather is cooler. Higher altitudes are cooler than lower altitudes at the same latitude. So if you know these things about an area, you figure that out. And it makes sense. The air is thinner, so it traps less heat. So what other factors might affect temperature besides altitude and latitude? Yes? Yes, humidity, but that is... Yeah, so what... Yes, humidity would affect it. But what's going to make a particular area more humid than another? But you're onto something there. Yes? Yes. Distance from large bodies of water. So he said humidity. An area that is near a large body of water, its climate is going to be affected. So again, you know this when you think about it, because an area, most coastal areas, even if they're farther north, they don't get as much snow because large bodies of water, especially like the ocean or lakes, they take a long time to freeze. They take a long time to heat up. Remember we did our lab with the lamps? The water did not change temperature very much. Air changes temperature quickly and ground in the middle, but water does not change temperature very quickly. So if you're near the ocean, you're not going to have as cold of weather, even at a higher latitude. So areas like Seattle are not going to have as much snow because the water, it cools it in the summer, but also warms it in the winter. And then finally, ocean currents. So what temperature is that water? Ocean currents, and we talked about this a little bit when we talked about oceans, but the global ocean currents, you have warm currents and cool currents. And so obviously in this picture, red is warm currents and blue is cool currents. But if you look at this, look at South America and look at the United States here, North America. Move that there. South America, if you took the same latitude, the ocean currents are going to affect things differently. So which side is going to have a warmer climate? Here on the east coast of South America or the west coast of South America? Where is it going to be warmer? Yeah, the west coast would be warmer because, well, because it's got a warm current going this direction, a warm ocean current. And in the United States, we have the same thing. Even though you've got these warm currents here, this blue line right here, this is called the California current. And so that's making the beaches along the western coast of the United States cold. Has anyone ever visited here? Yeah. California, Oregon, Washington State. Do you ever been to the beach there? Do you ever hang out on the beach with a picnic and get some sun? Not so much, really. But not as much. But even in California, right? You're doing your surfing and stuff there, you're wearing a wetsuit because the water is relatively cold. Yes. So Florida's got two things happening. One is, but yeah, Florida has warm water. There's warm water here in this current, the Gulf of Mexico. But yeah, even for the same latitude, much warmer and surrounded by water on more sides. And similarly, over here, how about on the East Coast? Everyone been to an East Coast beach? Cape Cod, New York, North Carolina, right? Yeah, and then Florida further south. Those beaches are warmer. The water is also shallower. There's a number of things going on, but at the same latitude and the same distance from water and the same altitude. So latitude, altitude, distance from large bodies of water, all are the same, but the ocean currents change that. Make sense? Okay. So those are the four main factors that affect temperature. Ocean currents, distance from large bodies of water, altitude, and latitude. So then we have three factors that affect precipitation. What is going to affect how much it rains in a given place? Yes, what affects that precipitation amounts? Okay, good. So being near a large body of water, would that affect your precipitation also? Hang on a second. That's the same one. That's just a bigger picture of our ocean currents that we just looked at. Yeah, I should have, huh? So here are the things, the three main things that are going to affect precipitation, or how much it rains or snows. So prevailing winds. And this is, you were saying how near it is to water. Remember when we're talking about lake effect snow? Lake effect snow is a huge amount of precipitation, and it's affected by the water, but also the direction the wind is blowing. Remember also in Colorado, we've got the leeward side and the windward side. You've got the rain shadow and the upslope side, and that's going to affect the amount of precipitation. The climate, the things you can grow, the ecosystems in, Glenwood Springs and the western slope are very different than they are here on the eastern side of the Rockies because of the rain shadow. Then you have mountain ranges, as we just mentioned, in combination with prevailing winds. And then seasonal winds. Seasonal winds are not as big of a factor in Colorado, so they're a little less familiar to us, but there's monsoon winds that bring big, wet, heavy rains. We have what's called the Chinook, which is the snow eater winds. We've got upslope winds in the spring that sometimes bring moist wind from a different direction. So let's take a quick look. You've seen a picture like this before. Mountain ranges. Again, we've talked about this a lot. This is my beautiful cross section of Colorado. You got Grand Junction, you got Glenwood Springs. The wet weather, the moist wet weather from the west comes here, and then as clouds move, rain and snow falls out, and then over on this side we get less moisture. We have a drier climate here. Everybody good with that? Because we talked about it before. Okay, let's go back here for a minute. And the other thing, seasonal winds. Again, in the spring, we've talked about this a little bit. Our best chance for a snow day here in Colorado is when we get an upslope. It's a seasonal wind that instead of blowing this way, it blows this way. And so then that upslope wind, that seasonal wind, will actually put us on the windward side of the mountains. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do today. The 4 factors that affect temperature, 3 factors that affect precipitation, and then tomorrow and the next day, as you look at climate, you can look at the different climate zones. And you'll see here that similar to our air masses, everything's about temperature and precipitation. Tropical rainy, which is hot and humid. Dry climate. And then you could actually have cold deserts or hot deserts. Temperate and marine. Temperate, to me, always was a confusing word, but temperate just means not too hot or not too cold. So temperate, but near an ocean. And then, so that's the first 3 climate zones. And then temperate continental. So temperate near an ocean, temperate in the middle of a continent, polar, and highlands, which is basically a high altitude mixed in with another one. So this is what you'll be going over the next couple of days. Questions about these? And each one of these climate zones is affected by these factors that we went over.